an expert in development for ministries. I'm coming into the ministry having sort of off-ramped on a corporate engineering career, engineering management,
Okay.
startup business and stuff. And so I'm kind of onboarding as sort of my second career here. And so I'm not, I'm fairly naive about CRM in general, but I have, I've got, I'm a quick learner. And so you may find myself asking some fairly naive questions going, what the heck is this guy doing? But that's the situation. We are migrating from Salesforce to Virtuous after a bunch of iterations on what's the best new platform. And really my advocacy of Virtuous boiled down to, number one, it looks like a much easier platform to use than Salesforce. And number two, I'm really excited about the long-term potential of the marketing automation stuff. So that was really the key thing.
Excellent.
And then the last thing I'll say, and then I'll let you get going, is that,
sure.
We are in the midst of the migration. And just last week, I got the first test migration from Emily. And so I've kind of been, going through that bit by bit. And so some of my questions will relate to that, things I've encountered as I've gone through that test migration thing.
That's totally fine. And part of this is, so, it's hard to separate the two.
Mm-hmm.
I try to as much as I can, and I'll do that as we talk, because sometimes there are certain questions that come up in some of your migration conversations with Emily that are more, well, how do I do this thing? It's not about my data, but I'm just curious, how do I do X, Y, Z? And it's like, well, okay, well, we have some training time to account for that. Let's focus on, I'm your mover right now. Did I get all your furniture off the truck and into your house?
Right.
Someone else is going to come through and show you how to use all your new appliances, but I just want to make sure I got your furniture in. Okay, great. And same thing in this particular call, because I'm not always involved in every migration. Some I will have a hand in, some I don't. Okay. And so it may be, hey, that's a great question for Emily, but here's in my experience how this normally goes, or what our normal mapping decisions or process will be. And I can point you towards that and give you some insight into that. But then Emily will have to answer some of the questions about, well, where did X go, right?
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, especially from Salesforce, because there's, 1,000 different flavors of Salesforce, because it's always so bespoke.
Yes.
Woof. Okay. Now, there are some things that are structurally similar between the actual Salesforce structure and Virtuous structure, but then again, within Salesforce, you could be using a plugin that goes around that structure entirely. So I don't always know going in, but we'll find that out together.
Okay.
Okay. So here's what we want to try to cover or discuss today. We're going to start with the dashboard itself. Right, there's some written documentation, but some of the training material that you've gone through up till now hasn't really talked too much about the dashboard. Probably heard the most about it in some of the sales process and demos. So we'll talk just a little bit about customizing that dashboard and how to read some of the elements on here, the financial, the social scores, how those are put together and everything. And some basic sort of what I call, for lack of a better term, housekeeping items, just in terms of navigating the system, updating your profile and your preferences and things like that, things you just need to know to make your way around. Okay. And then we'll talk about some things, because this being the basics training, the idea is this is the training that everybody needs. The later sessions are going to be smaller and more focused. This is what everybody needs to really get comfortable. And one of the things that everybody needs to do in the CRM is look somebody up. For whatever reason, they're a donor, you're trying to process their check, you want to give them a call, you're about to have lunch with them. Whatever the reason, generally speaking, you're going to have to look somebody up. And so there are three main ways that you can do that in Virtuous, that you can search for somebody. Those would be searches, filters, and queries. Mm-hmm. And really what we're going to focus on today, more than how to build queries and everything else, there's a whole video series on that, for example, and a recorded webinar on that. There's a lot of material there. But our main focus is going to be the decision tree. When do I search? When do I use a filter? When do I use a query? right? Why do I have these 3 tools and how do they work together? And then we're also going to talk a little bit about notes and tasks. Because again, no matter what kind of user you are, at some point you've got to manage tasks or create them for other users. And everybody should be logging notes to document their actions so that everybody knows what the latest is with a particular donor.
Okay.
Now, as we go through all of that, we're also going to be talking about the data structure in Virtuous of contacts and individuals, looking at relationships and tags, the main data that you see on a contact record to make sure that you're pretty comfortable with that.
Okay.
And again, sometimes that becomes where we get a little, for lack of a better term, stuck. Well, we might talk a lot about that. And if we do, and we come out of this call and you feel a little bit better about how to manage that, how to understand that, great. Notes is very easy. You know, we can teach you how to log notes, or Emily can point you to an article on notes. Like, that's pretty fast.
Mm-hmm.
But understanding some of the other stuff, that's the big thing for me.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Groovy. Okay. So for today, we're here in your sandbox. Okay. So same thing that you see when you log in. And when you log in, first time, every time, you're going to land on this dashboard. This is your home base. You know, you come here and then you go off to do whatever you need to do. And if you've already logged in and kicked the tires and played around, you've noticed that this looks kind of barren when you first come in.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be the same for every single user, because everybody gets to configure their own dashboard. There is no sort of default user dashboard or something like that. Everybody gets to build their own, because everybody's got a slightly different focus. Everybody needs to see something or wants to see something displayed a different way. And so the main way you're going to customize this dashboard is by adding these widgets, these big empty boxes up at the top. You can click to add a widget, and then you'll be able to select from the list of all the available widgets. And so if you're focused on some of the fundraising activity and campaigns, you might want to look at the giving by campaign, right? Or even giving by channel if you want a breakdown of how direct mail is performing versus email versus events and things like that. So if we add that giving by campaign and hit save, that'll add that widget on here. And it defaults to the last 30 days, but I can even customize that. I can say that I want to look at the last 90 days, right? Or I can look at this whole year, for example. And then I can hover over the graph, and that'll show me the dollar amounts that are included here. But I can also customize this graph. So this Scholarship 2018 campaign is far and away outstripping everything else, and it's making my graph maybe a little bit harder to read. So I could say, we'll take that out of the equation if I click on it right there in the legend, right? And then that'll change that graph.
Okay.
Also, if you're having a really bad day, just clicking this back and forth is very soothing. It's kind of nice for you. You can just do that and, yeah, reset your brain. It's great.
Okay. Hey, is there on the duration, is there a way to customize that? The this year, yeah, right there.
You can select from the list that are available.
Okay.
That's the customization that you would have here.
But what if I wanted like last 5 years? That's not available?
No.
Okay. That's fine.
Yep. Everything about the widgets is really selecting from available choices, right? And then further customizing within there a little bit. Depends on the widget, right? Now over here, I get another big blue box. I could add another one. Maybe you want to focus on your trend lines, right? For the last, this would be for the last 24 months, the yearly giving widget. That'll show you the last 12 months overlaid over the previous 12-month period. And again, you can click on this legend up here to change that graph if you want to. Now, once I've added these two, I filled up those boxes, but you get a big blue button. You could keep adding widgets all the way down the screen if you want. You can go nuts. You know, you want to have everything in front of your eyeballs when you log in, groovy. Go for it. And there are a few widgets that you can even use to track progress on specific projects or initiatives that you're raising money for. There's a project goal overview, a project overview, and a project success widget. And each of these, so if I do the project overview, for example, when I select that widget, first I have to select a project that I want to essentially point it at. I want to see how this project is doing. So that could be mid-year sponsorship 2018. And then it defaults to this year, but again, I can pick the time frame for that. And then over here, if I wanted to, I could actually add another copy of that exact same project overview widget. But then here, I might want to point it at something different, like my fall memorial fund. Look at that. They've raised the exact same amount of money. What if I do scholarship 2018? Well, that's a little different. Okay. That's really jarring if they're identical. You only get that with these fake sandbox databases. Now, if you add a bunch of these project overviews, even though it tells you right in here what project it is, that might be kind of hard to see. And at a glance, it's kind of hard to read. So for any of these widgets, if you click where the title is, you can actually rename that widget. So I could call this one Scholarship Overview. And then I could call this one my, whatever this was, mid-year sponsorship overview. Up here, if I don't like the name giving by campaign, and instead I want to call this one top campaigns, you can do that too. Okay. And so with all this mixing and matching and even renaming widgets, no two people are going to have the same dashboard at the end of the day. You might have the same widgets that you've chosen, but in a different order or with different names or different time frames. Who knows?
Okay.
Now, in the course of just this 2 minutes talking about widgets, we've mentioned campaigns, we've mentioned channels, we've mentioned projects. Earlier, I brought up contacts and individuals and tags and relationships. There's a lot of terminology, especially coming from Salesforce. One of the trickiest things is terminology because contact has two completely different meanings in the two systems. They're essentially opposite one another. And terminology is often one of the big stumbling blocks, right? Getting up to speed. And it's always, you can tell someone's using a new system. They always kind of use a mix of the old system terms and the new system terms, and they're trying to get their head around it. It's like, when you're trying to learn a new language. But the faster that you can sort of adopt that lingo, the easier it's going to be. The easier it's going to be to navigate the system, to know, hey, what is this report going to show me? Well, if I understand the concept of projects and things, that's going to be a lot easier. And it's going to be easier even to have conversations internally with your team and even conversations with support here, right? When you can speak that same language. So to help you get up to speed, if we click on the little mortarboard hat up here in the upper right, you can get to our training academy. That shows you where you can see all the videos that you've seen, recordings of our training webinars, things like that. And then support, that takes you to all of our documentation. And there's a getting started section here. That's where you can see our how to speak Virtuous glossary. And that'll go through a lot of these critical terms. You're going to run into what's a pass-through, right? What does lapsed and pre-lapsed mean? That'll explain all that. That getting started section also has a guide to our common on-screen icons. A lot of people say, well, what's the pencil and paper again? Well, you can keep that handy maybe for the first couple of weeks, right? And then you'll be able to reference that and see, oh, okay, that's copy. Got it. Right. The print one's usually pretty easy unless someone is, in their 20s and they don't know what a printer is. I have to explain to my kids, why does that square thing mean save? Well, that's called a disk. See?
Don't worry,
makes sense.
I'm old enough to understand those archaic.
Oh, man. Now, also in here, you have a guide to customizing your dashboard. It goes through some same thing we just did in terms of selecting widgets, but this will also link to our widget selection guide. And we only looked at a couple of them. This goes through all the available widgets to show you what kind of data you'll see from that. It'll talk about how customizable or interactive they are and has recommendations for what sort of role might benefit most from this particular widget or from the data in there. Okay. So that's really good for all of your team, really, to be able to go through and use as a reference when they're setting up their dashboard. Okay, so that's how you get to your resources, that little graduation cap there. Now, right next to it, you see my tiny face. You should not see my tiny face if you're logged in on your computer. That would be bad. You might see a blank avatar there if you haven't added your photo yet. And if you haven't, that's okay, because if you click there, that'll let you edit your profile. And then if you click on the little avatar, you can upload your photo. So everybody knows who you are, right, when you log a note, when you do something in the system. You can also update your username, your personal time zone. You can change your password, right? It's a very different scenario. There's some older systems where you have this central admin that controls everybody's password. Here, everybody manages their own login. Everybody has that forgot password link. And each user can choose to turn on two-factor authentication if you want that separate layer of protection, right? You get that text message code sent to you when you log in. And you can also link it to a Google account or a Microsoft account for single sign-on, which is kind of nice. The one thing to keep in mind is that is only available for the desktop app, not the mobile app. So single sign-on, if I choose to use that, it won't let me use that to access the mobile app on my phone. That's coming to the mobile app, but a little bit of separation there, at least for right now. Just something to keep in mind.
Can admins manage other people's profiles?
No. Every user manages it for themselves.
Okay.
The only thing that you manage as an admin is who is an enabled user. You're allowed in or you're not. And what someone's permissions are. Okay. What are they allowed to do in there or not allowed to do? But each user is going to manage their username, their password, right, and their own security settings for themselves. So you can have some internal policy around, hey guys, everybody needs to turn on two-factor or something like that, but it's for each user to do it on their own.
Okay.
Okay. Now the other thing that you have here, and you've probably already had to do this if you've been playing with test data, is the ability to switch between organizations. Right? You've already been switching back and forth from your sandbox to the test instance and things like that?
Yep.
Okay. So you can click there, you can select the other organization. Now here's the trick. Number one, that's only a short-term thing that you're going to have multiple organizations. Right? Once you're up and running, you only need your live instance. The others go away. But it can be really confusing sometimes to know where you are. When you log out of Virtuous, next time you log in, you're going to come back to wherever you were last. So if you were practicing in the sandbox, and then you go home for New Year's, and you come back in on the 2nd, and you log back into Virtuous, it's going to take you back into the sandbox. And sometimes you might forget where you are, because the screen looks the same. Right? Now, each of them are separate instances. So one, giveaway will be you might have different widgets from one to the other because your widget selections will be different, your permissions will be different, everything else. But still, when you look at a contact record or something like that, it can be hard to know where you are. So on pretty much any screen, if you just scroll all the way to the bottom of the screen, right underneath of our logo, it'll tell you what database you're in. And that's the easiest way to get your bearings and then either realize you're in the right place or you're in the wrong place and you need to go switch.
Got it.
Make sense? The only other thing, outside of pointing out some of these resources, that's sort of a housekeeping thing, is just navigating in the system. And if you've been doing some of the training on your own and playing around, you already know, probably, but you've got your menu down the left-hand side. Right? All these icons are all the other screens you can go to. If you don't know what the leaf means, if you don't know what the hand means, that's okay. You can either hover, and it'll tell you, that's grant management, or you can pop open the menu by clicking on more at the bottom, and that'll show you all the names. And that menu will stay open for as long as you leave it open. So you can go to the contact screen, you can look up whoever you need to, you can go do something else, and that menu will stay open. So for the first week or two, you might find yourself leaving it open a lot. And then after you get the hang of things, you can close it back down again.
Okay.
And then to get back to the dashboard, you can either click on the dashboard icon, that's the very top of the menu, or click on our logo. You click on the wings in the upper left, they'll always take you back home. And then you're good.
Okay.
Now, a little bit further down on the dashboard, we've got tasks and activity. We'll put a pin in those. We'll come back to those in a little bit. And then below that, you get this best calls list, your best calls to make today list. And the idea with this list is that we want to put in front of you the folks that you should be talking to, even if you didn't realize it, because they're some of your best donors and your best prospects. And they probably also haven't heard from you in a while, right? And so you'll see people that are on here either for financial reasons, right? You'll see the little green says, hey, they're on here for financial reasons. They're a great donor. They could be on here for social reasons, right? So they've got a lot of social capital that you might want to be able to tap into. You'll also see that we'll sprinkle in folks who might be lapsed or pre-lapsed so that you can reach out to them and make sure that they renew their support before they completely go away. We'll toss those in as well. And we're always going to alternate these. Okay. Now the financial and the social recommendations, those are based on these scores in here. The financial score and the social score. And both of these are on a scale of 0 to 99, 99 being the best.
Okay.
And it's a percentile ranking. Okay, so it's not like a numeric score where we say, oh, well, X plus Y equals a score of 62. A 62 in one database might be a 99 in another database, right? It all depends on what all data is in there.
So is that, quick question, is that financial score based on data internal to, the giving profile of the contact, or is it based on something external that Virtuous goes and looks at, or a combination of both? What's that based on?
It's all based really on data that you provide. So the financial score is based solely on their giving history to you. That's it, right? How much have they given? How often do they give? How long have they been a donor? It's not just strictly on dollar amount, right? But on all of that, what's their financial score? So that's why I say, like, somebody might have a donor who's given millions of dollars and has been giving for years in their database, right? And then someone who's given, a few $1,000s. That person who's given a few $1,000s might not rank as highly. In another database, they don't have these $1 million donors. That person who's given a few thousand is now a 99, right? Because it's a relative score.
Got it.
But so financial, straightforward. Just what's their giving history, right? How good a donor are they for you? Social actually includes 3 different elements. When we look at that social score, the first thing we look at is relationships. The number of relationships that they have. Because remember, you can add relationships on a contact record. You can relate to contacts to one another, to individuals to one another, contacts to individuals. And on any record, the number of relationships contributes to that score. The more relationships they have, the higher the social score. Now those, again, are going to be relationships that you essentially tell us about, right? You're going to add those to that record as you find out that 2 people went to school together or worked together or whatever it is. Now, the second thing we look at is geolocation. Where do they live? What's their primary address? And are they nearby to a lot of your other contacts? Right? Because if they live in a neighborhood where there's a really dense cluster of a lot of your supporters and things, well, great, then they're going to have a higher social score. If they live alone, in a tent in the woods, lower social score, not so great. The third thing we look at is social media, and in particular, what we look at is Twitter. And the number of Twitter followers that someone has. The more followers they have, the higher their social score. And again, that's going to be based on you providing their Twitter handle as one of their contact methods, right? So all of this is dependent on the data that's put into that profile, their address, their giving, their contact methods, relationships that are added, but all that gets factored into that scoring.
And is there any data from Facebook that's included in that social, or is it strictly Twitter? Strictly Twitter. Got it. Okay.
Now, the thing to know about this best calls list is it is a shared list. It's not just yours. Okay. So this is like you posted a leaderboard on the wall in the office and said, hey guys, here's our best people. Okay. So if you went in and you were going to call Mariel and Barnett here, you could click on the little clipboard icon over on the right. That'll let you add a note that you called them, and it'll take them off the list. But it takes them off the list for everybody. So no one else will see them on that list, which in that case is a pretty good thing, right? Then you don't have them getting called by 5 different people. Now, by the same token, let's say that you looked at the Barnbys here and you said, well, they're not my donor. Someone else manages that relationship. So I'm not going to worry about them. I'm going to delete them off my list. Now, first off, when you click on delete, it becomes an undo option. And you have that undo option available for as long as you stay on this page. Once you navigate away, it's been done. There's no going back.
Okay.
But if I delete them, then I delete them from everybody's best calls list. So I just went up to that leaderboard on the wall and I ripped them right off the leaderboard for everybody. So just keep that in mind, right? As everybody is managing this list, it's something for everybody to know. It is a list for the whole team. Okay.
Now, say again what when you went to the clipboard and made a note, what was it that then indicated to take that you've done the action? Is
it was that.
It was just making a note?
Yep.
Regardless of what the note said?
Right.
Okay.
Because that is an indicator that, hey, I've done this, I've contacted them,
so
and they're ready to go.
I shouldn't use that notepad to say, hey, I better call this guy. Right?
Right. Not unless you intend to also create a tag that says, or a task that says, and remember to call them.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Yep. I got it. Now,
one of the other things I mentioned at the top of this was what you need to do, right? For working in Virtuous, one of the main things everybody needs to do is to search for somebody. Right? I got to go look somebody up.
Hey, before we leave this,
sure.
Best calls. Can you comment a little bit about what this will look like when we have like imported our data from Salesforce? How is it gonna like kind of kick the whole process off? Is it going to look at the data that we have, and based on the various, financial scoring and social scoring, is it going to then present, a huge list of things we need to do?
It's gonna be the same thing that you see here. Yeah, because it's gonna go through all the data that gets imported, and it's still going to assign financial and social scores once it runs. Basically, there's a job that we run on everything to calculate all the statistics, and part of that is calculating the financial and social scores. And once that scoring is done and it can start ranking everybody on those scores, it'll start building out that best calls list.
Got it. And how many best calls contacts are, I mean, does it like pick the top 100, or does it just keep going on a ranked list?
Just keeps going.
Okay.
Yep. And at a certain point, so let's say that you did dismiss a best call, you deleted them and said, no, we're not going to call them, right? Or you did call these guys, you clicked on that clipboard, you gave them a ring, and then a couple of months go by, right? 3 months go by, they'll probably bubble right back up again onto that list if they really are one of your best people.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So let's talk about looking people up, right? Because it's database. It's a CRM. You're going to have to do that. So you've got searches, you've got filters, you've got queries. These are all different ways for you to be able to look these folks up. One of the easiest ways to look up a record is to just go ahead and search for them, right? In a little search bar here in the upper left. Now, I know you've gone through the videos and some of the training, so let's see if you remember. What are some of the things I can plug into that search bar to find a contact record?
Well, like the name.
Which name?
Last name, first name.
Okay, what else?
Well, organization. What else?
Right, so I can.
Address? I don't know.
Nope. Not address.
Okay.
Anything else?
I'm sure there is, but clue me in.
All right. Well, you got a couple of them, and then you started guessing. So we'll get you there. So first off, you mentioned name, right? And yes, you can search by name. So I just typed in the Training Foundation up here, and that brought up the Training Foundation. Here they are, right? And the Training Foundation, that is the contact name on this record. Now, when we say contact, and again, I know this is probably the trickiest term of all coming from Salesforce because they're kind of opposites. When we talk about contact, what is a contact in Virtuous?
Well, the contact is, I think, analogous to account in Salesforce. So a contact is sort of the overarching record, and a contact can be a household, it can be a foundation, it can be an organization, and then those things are comprised of individuals.
Exactly. And what are individuals?
Well, individuals are what Salesforce calls contacts.
Which
right?
is the great part for you, right? They're people. Yeah.
Yep.
That's the easy thing. Individuals are people.
Yes.
So that part's easy. So yes, you're right. So a contact, and the thing to remember about contacts is, contact is really the fundamental record type in Virtuous. Everything really revolves around contacts, right? So gifts and pledges and notes and tasks and tags, all of those relate to contacts in Virtuous. Okay, it's all tracked at that contact level. So for good old Patience and Obadiah here, which are great names, I had to pick this record, right? This $115 in Life Today Giving, that's from their household, the Crawcore household, right? Because most everybody's going to get a year-end statement as a couple, right? They're filing their taxes jointly. So it's at the household level that we track all of that. Okay, so that's critical to note. Now here on the Training Foundation, I have these 4 individuals on here, Noland and Marlene and Celine and Jasmine. They all seem like great folks. So I'm assuming they all work at the Training Foundation. And the thing is, I can search with the contact name like we did, or I can search with any of these individual names to find this record. So if Jasmine were to call me on the phone and I don't know who the heck she is, and I just start typing in her name up here, right, that's still going to get me to this same record. Any of the individuals on that record will get you to that same place. Does that make sense? Now here, let me ask you a question. So let's say that Celine here, we know that she works at the Training Foundation. She's listed on here. And as you're processing gifts one day, she has decided that she loves the work that you're doing. And so she wants to go ahead and support you personally. So she sends in a personal check, for $250. So if you're doing gift entry, can you put that gift on this record?
I would say not, because it's not a gift from the foundation, gift from Celine.
Exactly right. Right. This $325, same thing. This is giving, or might be grants, who knows, from the foundation, not from any of these folks. So if Celine turned around and said, hey, I love what you're doing, I'm going to support you personally, you would need to create a new household contact record, right, for the Seidlitz household, and then you'd move Celine out of here and into her own household record to be able to track her giving separately from what's here.
So this is a question.
Sure.
So in that case, you might have individuals, and make sure I get the terminology right. You might have individuals that are both associated with the foundation and with a household. Is that true? So if I search for Celine, would she pop up both in this foundation and in her household?
She would if you leave her here as an individual. And so that's why I say you would need to move her from here, take her out of this list, and have her live in her own household contact record instead. Because I don't want 2 Celines, right? What I don't want to do is search Celine's name and have the training foundation come up and her household come up. Because now I've got two of her, because individuals are their own records, right? Celine has her email and her phone number, her birthday, and everything else related to her.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to have two copies of her in my database. That
So
gets really complicated.
right, but I wouldn't want to lose the association. So would that then be a relationship that I would create for Celine, that she's related to the training foundation or something?
Exactly right.
Okay.
Exactly right. So for example, so here we had Patience and Obadiah. So maybe Patience here, Patience and Obadiah give on their own. They've got their own giving, so they needed to have their own household record, but maybe Patience also works at the training foundation. It's a long commute, Florida to California, but hey, when you're committed. So we want to add a relationship here so that I can still show that they're related. So I can look for the training foundation. There they are. Now remember, I can relate contact to contact, right? So that's kind of household to foundation, right? Or household to household. That kind of relationship, you'd see a lot of times with church membership.
Yeah.
This family, this household, they're members of this church. That's top level to top level. But a lot of relationships are going to be personal, right? So it might be I select Patience on this side, and over here I select Jasmine because they are cousins. And I want to relate those two people to one another, right? They're former college roommates or whatever it is. But both sides of the relationship don't have to be at the same level. So I can also say that Patience, the individual, is related to the training foundation, which is a contact, because they are her employer, right? And I can say Patience has worked at the foundation, since 2012 or whatever. And I can save that. So now when I look them up, that'll show the training foundation is listed here as an employer. If I hover there, the hover text will show me my note that I plugged in. Patience has worked there since 2012. I'll know that right away. And then that will link me to the training foundation if I click on it. And here on the training foundation, I'm going to see there's 4 folks listed on here, and then Patience is also an employee. She's related right here.
Right. Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Because yeah, especially with there's 2 things you're going to be careful about, and I do see this happen a lot, right? Where someone will give, right? Celine gives on her own, and so they create a new household record for Celine, but she also stays here. And like I said, then I've got 2 Celines, right? Or with Patience, you'd have two versions of Patience. So 2 things happen, right? Number 1, now when I'm sending out emails, they're getting 2 copies of it. I send out a mailer, and a copy goes to Celine and lands on her desk, and a copy goes to Celine and lands on her kitchen table, right? She doesn't need 3 copies of my appeal. She needs 1. But the other thing is, if someone is giving personally and they're giving through their company or their foundation, they're probably a really great donor. And I'm going to manage that relationship personally. And the last thing I want is to have 10 places to look to check the notes to see what's the latest. What was the last conversation with them? Where did we leave things? What's the next step in this? I don't want to have to check 5 places. I want to manage it all from their household. Celine and her husband or whoever, they live in their household, and that's where I should be managing things. And then everything else is just related, by different spokes to the company where they work, to the community foundation where they have a donor advised fund, and everything else. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay, excellent. Any questions on how any of your current donors fit into this model?
That's a good question. And as you've been talking through this, I'm going to have to be, I'm realizing it's going to be important to make sure as I work with Emily to map from Salesforce to Virtuous that I get these relationships correct and the contacts correct. So that I'm just making mental note to myself. So I think I understand. Maybe a question.
Sure.
So when would you use relationships versus tags? So yeah, what's the difference between a tag and a relationship?
Well, a relationship is a connection between two records,
Mm-hmm.
right? So a relationship, like we did here, connects this foundation to patients specifically in this household to know that those two go together,
Mm-hmm.
right? A tag is a little bit different because a tag gives you information about this record. So here I can see that they've been identified as a prelapsed donor. Right? And then if I click on the add button, I can add other tags. Tags are where I want to track things like my communication preferences. So if someone has said, do not call, do not email, do not make direct eye contact, right? Whatever they've said, I
Right.
want to have that tagged on there. And then I can also use them to identify people who belong to certain donor groups, like
Mm-hmm.
my legacy society, or, here we have the President's Club. They might be to track where they are in terms of their own donor journey. Are they a major donor? Are they a recurring donor? Are they, a principal donor? Like, what kind of giver are they? And then also to track their interests, right? What kind of projects do they tend to support, so that when I have another project like that, I can go out to these folks and I can make sure that I include them in my appeal for support.
So you wouldn't use tags to say, tag them as related to the training foundation, for instance.
Right. My tags are sort of a central pool
Yeah.
of terms that I can apply to a group of contacts.
Yeah.
Right? And so anything that's going to be, really custom like that, I mean, that would make my list of tags really intense.
Yes.
Right. So my relationships are what I want to use to link those two records to one another. Records can also be grouped together because maybe they are, a sustaining donor and a planned giver, and they're interested in clean water, right? I can add all these tags at once. They're the only one with those tags. I can see that. But for example, prelapsed, right? If I click on prelapsed, that's going to show me everybody with that prelapsed tag. So that does connect them to these other 17 contact records, but only because they all share that same trait or quality. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. There's Patience and Obadiah on that list.
And just incidentally, I'm guessing you'll cover this in a subsequent thing, but what defines somebody as a prelapse donor, for instance, and qualifies for that tag? That's defined somewhere.
Yep, that's in that glossary that we looked at.
Right.
So that How to Speak Virtuous glossary, right down here, you've got some of these system tags. So lapsed and prelapsed, right? So prelapsed means basically in danger of lapsing. So someone who hasn't given in at least 6 months.
And are those customizable?
No, these are defined within the system.
But I could create my own custom tag. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Whoever's the admin for your instance will be able to create new tags for the system.
And they can be created that, yeah, never mind. We won't go down that. I'll ask later.
I mean, once you create new tags, they're available to anybody to grab and use.
Mm-hmm. But I can define, say, could I, for instance, could I create a tag that was Ben's custom prelapsed tag, and create it in such a way that instead of 6 months, it was a year?
Yes. Now, lapsed is a year.
Okay, yeah, I was just using that.
That's the last 12 months, but yes. So the key is those are two separate things that you're bringing up, and we will cover them in some other sessions. Because first is, can I create custom tags? Well, yes, I can create custom values, right, that I want to have applied.
Right.
But then separate from that, and I want to create my own set of rules for how that tag gets applied, and I want the system to do it for me. Yes. And yes, you can do that. That is one of the things that you can do within automation.
Got it.
right, which you mentioned at the top. So you'll create the tag, and then you'll go into automation and build a workflow to say, okay, here are the parameters for when to apply or remove this tag. And then the system can manage that for you.
Yep. Okay. Got it.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Groovy. Okay, any other questions on that structure? I know it's starting to give you some thoughts and things to consider for migration. That's one of the reasons we want to get this, we want to get this scheduled so that we can help you with that. But any other immediate questions?
Let's see. Yes. Looking at the central pane with households and the individuals comprising that household, we've got the informal name of patients in Obadiah. Now, in Salesforce, and this is something I need to talk to Emily about, in Salesforce, we have both an informal name and a formal name. And sometimes those are a little bit different for some reason. So can this pane be customized so that it shows both the informal name and the formal name?
Yes, here's what I will say. So there's two things. Number one, it might be that it makes sense to map the formal name as the contact name, and the informal name is the informal name, right? And so it could be, hey, that's just a mapping decision. And so hey, the formal name is always going to live here. Sweet. That's easy enough. If I want to have separate values for that, that's okay, because you can create custom fields. Okay, and anytime you add a custom field, it will show in this pane, but only if there is data in it. And we're going to talk in your admin training about how to create custom fields and things like that. But as you create custom fields, just know that you won't see them show up here. Like there's a lot of fields that I don't see here. For example, for Obadiah, I don't see a space for phone or email or anything because he doesn't have any of those. Right? I do see his birthday. I see his age. Great. For the household here, I'm seeing their anniversary because we have it. I'm seeing the informal name because we have it. I'm seeing this address because we have it. But if I didn't have, for example, an anniversary, it's not going to show. Okay, if I went to edit this contact record, you'll see there are some other fields here like a description, right? Patients and Obadiah are great people, which is certainly a notation that I'm sure is going to be super important. Once I add that, then the description shows up. And so if you create a custom field called formal name, you'll see that show up in this box.
Okay.
Make sense?
And so, yeah, so like on a custom field that was true or false, if it's unspecified, it won't show up. It's only if it's actually set to true or false.
Correct.
And
so
I can always tell what the custom fields are. Oh, do the custom fields then apply to every contact? If I create a new custom field, it just gives that custom field to every contact if it's a custom contact field?
Sure does.
Okay. But it'll only show up in this pane if it's actually filled with something.
Correct. You're only going to see it if it's populated with a value.
Yeah, okay. Okay. And let's see, are there custom fields for both households and individuals?
Yep.
Those are differentiated, so an individual could have different custom fields than a household?
Yes, and you're going to need that, right? Because remember, things like tags apply to a household, right? So sometimes you might want to add a tag that says something like, I see a lot of times people will say, well, I want to create a tag for board member. Okay, that's great. And it's good to identify that a particular household has a board member in it. But between patients and Obadiah, if I want to know which one is a board member, I need to have an individual custom field to identify that person as a board member, whether it's patients or Obadiah, right? So those custom fields that exist at the individual level are crucial for things like that, that are going to differentiate people within a household.
Oh, so that brings up another question. So you said tags apply to households. Do they
Yep.
also apply to individuals?
Nope. Again, tags are only at the contact level. So they apply to the foundation or the household or the school or business or club or whatever the contact is, but not to the individual. They're only at the contact level.
Okay, so for example, if I had invited a household to an event, and um, only one person out of that household actually attended the event, and I wanted a tag to indicate, okay, this person attended my event, then I wouldn't be able to use a tag because that wouldn't differentiate between the individuals within the household. It would only tag that the household was invited.
And you wouldn't want to use a tag for that anyway.
Okay.
And this is where we get into what I tend to call tag abuse, for
Yes.
lack of a better term.
Uh-huh.
Because tags are really easy to kind of grok and get your head around.
Yes.
And so tags tend to be sort of the first place that people go.
Yeah, and I'm guilty of
tracking
that.
data, right? Yeah, and it makes sense.
Okay.
It makes sense. They're easy to use, they're easy to create, they're easy to add. You can add them in bulk. It's like, man, tags are awesome. And so you start saying like, hey, people came to an event, I want to tag them. They volunteered for a thing, I want to tag them. I sent a mailer to somebody, I want to tag them. But that's taking this entire CRM and just shoving it into this little box for tags, right? There's a whole other CRM out there to track this stuff. So if someone comes to an event, I should be creating the event, and then I should be adding them to the event, and I'll see that on the events tab on their record.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly with volunteering, I create the opportunity to volunteer, I add the volunteer in their hours, and I see that on the volunteering tab.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and events and volunteering are two things specifically that interact with individuals. Everything else interacts with contacts, right? Again, giving and pledges and tasks and notes and tags and all those things deal with contacts. But events and volunteering deal with individuals because there you need a head count. It's not enough for me to say this contact is coming. Well, does that mean one person is or 50 people are coming?
Mm-hmm.
Right? The training foundation has 4 people. Are all 4 of them coming? Is it just 2 of them? Who's coming? So that's at the individual level. And so I'd be able to see on Patience and Obadiah's record, for example, that Patience attended my spring gala and Obadiah did not. Or I'd see them both listed as having attended the gala, or one of them attended and the other was invited but did not attend. Like I'll see that separately for individuals. So the event question isn't really a concern as far as tags go. But yes, anytime I apply a tag, the thing I want to remember is that tag is tagging the household. It's tagging the contact. It's not tagging Patience or Obadiah. Same with the training foundation, right? I'm not tagging something specific to Jasmine. I'm tagging this entire foundation.
Okay. I get that. So just a side note from me, in Salesforce, we have a custom field that indicated whether somebody attended a banquet. So when Emily migrates this over, the proper thing should be to somehow have an event that then anybody with that custom field asserted should be assigned to that event. Now, I don't know if that can happen, but the going forward, it should be that the banquets are events and people would be associated with those events, rather than a custom field indicating that. Is that right?
Well, and was it that there was a custom field for every event? Or
No,
one custom field where things got stored as like comma delimited?
Well, okay, here's my understanding. Again, I'm coming at this a little bit sideways. So in our Salesforce thing, there's a custom field that says 2017 banquet. Okay, and if it's checked, it meant they went there, and if it's not, they didn't. And it's a custom field. Now, what she's done is just created a custom field, and now it's showing up just like it did on Salesforce in the household, I guess, that shows, okay, they, 2017, they attended. But that, I don't think that really makes sense. It would make more sense for that to be associated with the individual and visible in events or something, indicating that, they were associated with there should be an event that gets migrated over, that's the 2017 banquet, and that every individual who attended should be associated with that event.
Now, is the custom field in Salesforce at the contact level or the account level?
It's got to be at the, well, that's a good question.
Because here's the trick.
I want to say it's at the Salesforce contact level, that is individual, but I'm not sure.
Right. And I know we're a couple minutes over our time. See, I told you, sometimes we'll get stuck right here on structure. It happens. But so here's a couple things to consider and to take into your conversation with Emily. And I'll sync with her too, just so she knows that we had this conversation. But sometimes it might get tracked at the account level. I've seen that where someone has like a custom field to say like this account, people came to this event. In that case, it's very hard to migrate that to an event structure unless the assumption is always going to be, hey, it's the primary individual on that record. So in Salesforce, that would mean the head of household flag. Whatever contact had the head of household flag, we make them the attendee because we don't have any other data to say otherwise. We don't know. If it's at the contact level, groovy. Right? Because that means that we can bring it over to the individual level in Virtuous. That's one thing. The other thing is, in order to do that, we need to be able to create the events in Virtuous. Okay, because it's not the first time we've had, hey, I have some custom fields that I check off when they attended this, that, or the other thing. Okay, if we need to convert that to event attendance, and this is one of the reasons we do the test migration and everything, so you can see here's what my data looks like in Virtuous context. And then we can figure out what we need to adjust. But to do that, we need the data about the event itself. So we need to know the date of the event, right? We need to have a name for the event at minimum to be able to create it as an event in Virtuous, a past event. And for doing that, it's the event name, the event date, the start time, end time are the basic data points we would need for each event to create it. And then each of those custom fields would have to clearly link to those events. And it sounds like they're all named pretty clearly. Great, because we can take that list and say, okay, all these contacts who have attended 2017 banquet is true, then make them attendees for the 2017 banquet event, if that makes sense.
Right.
And so it might be that there's data that's not in Salesforce that you would need to provide to Emily to create the events themselves.
Right. So now, just more general question.
Sure.
We could always go back and manually create these things, right? Within Virtuous. So say we had an event that had 25 people and we forgot, we didn't map it right or whatever, and we got lost. And then we said, oh, dang, we forgot this event that we really want to have in the system because, we want to refer back to it or whatever. So we could, after the fact, say 6 months after we're up and running, we could go back and create the custom fields or the event after the fact and then just plug in people. Is that true?
Yes, but the key is you need to have the data, right? Because the thing about Salesforce is once your license expires, you won't have access to Salesforce. So you would need to have the records of who are the people that I want to add to that event. Because if you do, you can go in and create an event just like you would for any of your new events, and then you can add attendees.
Yeah.
And if it's a matter of, hey, we're going to migrate them as custom fields because later, we're going to go back and create the events after migration, you can do that too, because it's easy enough for you to query for everybody who has a particular custom field value and say, I want to take all these people, and add them to this event, right? So that can happen. So
Okay.
the big thing is if we want it to happen on the migration, it's a matter of providing some of that data to Emily so that we can structure it and import it that way.
Right.
If it wants to happen after the fact, then it can happen after the fact. Just keep in mind that when we create custom fields, you can't delete a custom field.
Mm.
You can disable it, meaning I turn it off, right? I don't want to see it anymore, but it's still there. Right? It lives in the system.
Mm.
So that builds up over time, right? So if we can start you cleanly without extra custom fields that you don't need, great. We want to do that if we can. If not, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
That's what we want to shoot for.
Okay. So, okay. So,
all right. So I know we didn't get through all of our agenda, but we got through a chunk of it, and I think we got through some good questions for you. Some of the other things we'll have time to come back to, and don't forget, we also have our Q&A, which is really set up for after you go live, and that doesn't have a set agenda because that's going to be determined by, well, what are the things that you kind of need the most help with or that we need to review for you. So there's always some time built in for us to go back to some things and spend a little bit more time on them. Some of them are already covered in some of the material that you've got in terms of the training. And then if there are additional questions, we can cover those in other sessions as needed.
okay.
But I'll provide the recording of this on Teamwork so you can share that with some of the team members who need it. And then I think we've got our next session on the books already too. Am I making that up?
No, actually, I think I scheduled out all of the live training sessions.
Yeah, let me just make sure. I always like to make sure I know when we're talking next, you know, just to make sure. Let's see here. Where are we? No. Oh, not next week.
7th.
Take next week off. And that's the following week, the 7th. Looks like on the 7th, we're going to chat about gift processing. And then the 8th, we're going to go over campaigns and then admin training.
Yeah, so we have we have one on the 7th, we have 2 on the 8th, and then we have the 15th, and then I think the last one is on the 21st.
Excellent. And so that one's after you go live, right? The Q&A?
Yes.
There we go. All right, so we are set. If anything comes up in the interim, right, you can always post it to Teamwork. Emily will see that. She's more on the ball than me for sure, but I'll be able to see that too if there's anything I can help with.
Awesome.
All right, and so other than that, hey, have a good New Year's, and I'll talk to you next year.
All right. Thanks so much, Scott. Nice to meet you, and have a great New Year.
All right, you too. Bye, Ben.
Bye.